You know, some stories in our line of work aren't just sea tales. They're lessons, hard lessons, etched in steel and oil. Today, we're going to step onto the bridge of the Exxon Valdez. And we're not just here to look back at one of the biggest maritime disasters ever. We're here to understand the chain of failures, link by link. We're going to break down what went wrong, exactly why it went wrong, and what we as mariners need to take away from it to make sure it never, ever happens again.
Think about this. For over a decade, it was just another day at the office. Tanker after tanker, more than 8,700 of them, sailed through Prince William Sound without a major problem. It was a perfect system, or so it seemed. They had it down to a science, moving millions of barrels of crude. It was, for all intents and purposes, a massive success story.
And then came the one time the system completely failed. But here's the thing. This failure wasn't sudden. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was built, piece by piece, over time. Built from financial pressures, from risks that were ignored, and from that creeping, quiet danger, complacency. It's the ultimate example of how doing something right thousands of times can make you forget how badly it can go wrong just once.
Big accidents on board almost never just happen out of the blue. They're usually the end result of what we call latent failures. These are small, hidden problems in the system that can lie dormant for months or even years. You probably heard of the Swiss cheese model, right? It's the perfect way to visualize this. Imagine slices of cheese, each with a hole. One hole isn't a problem, but when all the holes in all the slices line up just right, that's when disaster gets a straight, clear path right through your defenses.
So let's look at the first slice of cheese, management and manning. Back in the 50s, a tanker this size would have a crew of about 40 people. The Exxon Valdez sailed with 19. Why? Simple, it was cheaper. So boom, there's your first hole. Then, shoreside, the vessel traffic service was understaffed. That's another hole. And the state-of-the-art iceberg monitoring the industry had promised, never installed. Another gaping hole. Every one of these decisions chipped away at safety.
Okay, next slice. The actual equipment on the bridge. This one is just incredible. The ship's primary collision avoidance radar was broken. Not for a few days, not for a few weeks, for over a year. A year. And yeah, management knew about it, but they figured fixing it was too expensive. Meanwhile, ashore, the VTS radar was so old and unreliable, it kept losing ships on the screen. The night of the accident, key communication sites were down too. The ship and the VTS were basically blind and deaf.
Now we get to the human element on the bridge itself, where the holes were lining up in a terrifying way. The captain had been drinking. The man he put in command, the third mate, wasn't even certified for pilotage in these waters. And to make it all worse, investigators believe the third mate was exhausted, possibly awake for 18 straight hours. Oh, and one more thing. At the most critical moment, right after the pilot got off, there was no lookout on the bridge.
And look, you don't have to take my word for it. The official NTSB report lays it out in black and white. It wasn't one thing. It was this perfect storm. A fatigued officer, an impaired captain, and a company that failed to put a fit and rested crew on its ship. All the holes in the Swiss cheese were perfectly aligned long before that hull ever touched Bly Reef.
So, the stage is set. You've got shortcuts in management, busted equipment, and a compromised bridge team. All those latent failures are just sitting there, waiting. Now let's step onto the bridge of the Exxon Valdez and watch how the final mistake, the active failure, unfolded in just a few short minutes.
Just watch how quickly this all unravels. The ship leaves port, pilot gets off. The captain tells VTS he needs to deviate to avoid some ice. Standard procedure, nothing unusual there. But then he puts the ship on a southerly course, switches on the autopilot, and, in a massive violation of company policy, he just leaves the bridge. He hands over command to his exhausted, unlicensed third mate, only 12 minutes before impact. 12 minutes.
This is a complete catastrophic breakdown of bridge resource management. The captain's order was simple: start the turn when Busby Island light is abeam. But the turn was started way too late, and when it finally was ordered, it was too slow to be effective. Then the lookout, back on the bridge, yells that the Bly Reef light is on the starboard bow, exactly where it should not be. The third mate scrambles for the phone, calls the captain, and says the 5 words no one ever wants to say: "I think we're in serious trouble." And then, impact. Okay, let's just pause right here for a second. I want you to really put yourself in that situation. You're on the bridge, you are exhausted, you know you're not licensed for these waters, and your captain has just walked off, leaving you in command of a supertanker pointed directly at ice and a reef. What do you do? What's your first action? It's a question every single one of us should have an answer to.
Hitting the reef? Well, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. The consequences of those few minutes on the bridge would ripple out for decades, changing laws, wrecking an entire ecosystem, and destroying people's lives forever.
The numbers are just mind-boggling. We're talking about 11 million gallons of crude oil poured into the sea. It eventually contaminated 1,300 miles of pristine coastline. And the cost to clean it up and deal with the lawsuits? More than $3 billion. At the time, it was the costliest man-made disaster in history.
And you can't even put a dollar amount on the environmental damage. Prince William Sound was this incredibly rich ecosystem, just teeming with life. Salmon, sea otters, seals, seabirds, all of it, decimated. The spill completely crippled the local fishing and tourism industries, wiping out livelihoods that had been in families for generations.
So not only did the systems to prevent the accident fail, but the systems designed to respond to it failed too. In those first critical hours, when they might have contained the spill, the response was a total disaster. The equipment wasn't ready, the plans fell apart, and the oil just spread and spread, completely out of control.
So, what's the point of going over all this? It's about what we learn from it. How did this horrific event actually help build a safer future? And what are the key lessons we have to carry with us onto the bridge, on every single watch? This disaster literally forced a revolution in maritime safety. That useless VTS system, it got a complete overhaul. Those single-hulled tankers that ripped open like a tin can, the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 mandated double hulls. The problem with an impaired captain? It led to the strict, zero-tolerance drug and alcohol testing we have today. We started putting new, much stronger layers of defense in place to stop those holes from ever lining up again.
So what's the big takeaway for us right now, today? It's that all the technology in the world doesn't mean a thing if you don't nail the fundamentals. It always comes back to the human factor. Fatigue, communication, decision-making. Good bridge resource management isn't just a phrase in a book. It's the process that keeps you off the rocks. And following procedures isn't just about ticking boxes. It's your first and best line of defense.
When you boil it all down, the true legacy of the Exxon Valdez is a massive, flashing warning sign. A warning against the single most dangerous hole in any system: complacency. It's that little voice that tells you, it's okay, we've done this 1,000 times. That's the voice that will get you into trouble. So the question I want to leave you with is this. On your vessel, on your watch, where's that hidden complacency? Finding it and plugging that hole is the most important lesson of all.